So the mind sets us up to be happy or sad. It creates games. For example, in chanting, by this point most of us have memories of chanting. And so if the chant leader picks the wrong key, and there are discordant sounds, we go, oh. And at the end of it, think, that was a crummy chant. Because we're comparing it to past chants. Well, that was the wrong key. Actually, Pattabhi Joyce, he'll sometimes pull like really impossible keys. And actually, So at some point in practicing, we start to see how we've confounded ourselves through a game set up in the mind that I want it to sound this way, and I'm expecting to get these kind of warm vibes out of this practice with kind of lavender, orange hues around the edges of the vibes. So I can settle back into this mental image about how nice everything is. And then it doesn't happen, and that was not a good practice I just had. And so in this way, the mind creates an image of what it expects. And then when what is doesn't match up exactly with what it expects, there's this gap called Dukha, or suffering. And this is pretty much the story of my life, perhaps the story of your life. And so the process of yoga is to suspend that very gaming of the mind, in which we almost irresistibly, as a reflex, before we make a choice in the matter, we've labeled what's arising in the mind. We've labeled it, we've categorized it, and we've already taken off in comparing it, looking up everything we know about it, referring it to other things, and the actual raw experience itself, which chanting is to present to you, raw chanting, even if out of key, it's raw vibration, is quite ignored. And all these silly little things, which really have no value, it's just like we sit around and do yoga, and then we become all concerned about really silly little things, like what other people think about us, or what the other people think about the yoga practice that we're doing. Silly, just like gossipy kind of things. That, at the time of death, hopefully won't be the last thing to loom up in the mind. But this is exactly the kind of little games the mind plays. It's labeling things, reducing things to an image, then comparing, and on that basis accepting and rejecting things. This is all part of the natural function of the mind to keep us alive. So we, find something on the ground, we put it in our mouth, we chew it, and we go, because we have kind of a built-in set of categories, that are almost precognitive to taste whether it's going to be good for the body or not. And that way we accept, swallow it, or reject it. And in this way, we have survived very well. At least our species has. And other species, too, cockroaches have done quite well. Dogs, in their relationship with humans, have done quite And this is all based on that acceptance and rejection, the ability to find an appropriate symbol for something, to quickly reference it with other symbols, find out everything you can, get the name of it, because in naming there's power, and then based on some criterion, we act or reject. And this is all well and good, and it's to be expected, but when it comes to being happy, the mind is not successful in creating happiness that way. It's simply successful at competing with others, at finding a good cave to hide in, making a sharp spear, hunting, eating, biting, swallowing, spitting back out. And so yoga is kind of a game of games in which we turn the mind back on itself so that we can suspend the game in order to taste complete freedom or liberation from the suffering inherent in the game, because the game is always incomplete. There's always a gap, even when you get good at the game. And so when we find in the Yoga Sutra the description of samadhi is when we have a presentation which is either the inner or the outer world presenting itself, we suspend the activity of, what do they call it? Oh yeah, nama, naming, giving name to it, and relating it, jnana, is everything we know about it. Those two functions are suspended through the practice of yoga, and what is called the artha, which in this case would be just the raw or immediate experience, shines forth on its own, as if sacred, as if empty of a separate self. When we see it as if empty, then we know that ultimately the name is part of a game, and that the referential knowledge about it is part of the game, and that the thing in itself truly is sacred, because it's interlaced, enmeshed with everything, both either material or spiritual, or intimate or impersonal. That's all I have to say. And so the game of yoga is actually finding out the basic patterns that we play the game in, and not rejecting them at all, and not being distressed at their presence, but simply observing them, almost as if you would observing some fantastic wild creature, some divine bird or something that has this most fascinating of activities, which is this constant creation or reductionism of reducing things to theories. And we find out through the yoga practice the root or the physiological triggers. She has permission to leave, by the way. She's not leaving out of disgust or protest. So this was prearranged. So we're playing the very root physiological triggers of the thought process and the counter process in order to create within Hatha Yoga the physiology of stunning the mind, as if with a stun gun, or as if with something of overwhelming beauty or depth, which fortunately is actually everything that's arising, has overwhelming depth. And actually, if the senses are clean or cleaned out, even the most ordinary appearances are endlessly fascinating in themselves, even prior to the process of reducing them to name and theory about them. And so we're creating this situation in the body through practice. It's just as if we were sitting. So just sitting is pretty much what yoga practice is. And through yoga asana, we're just sitting, and then we create extremes, asymmetries and symmetries, and we kind of explore the possibilities. Or if that doesn't suit you, you can just sit. And as you sit, there are asymmetries. And so the physiological patterns, the patterns of the nervous system of sitting too much on your left sitting bone, sitting too much on your right sitting bone, hyperextending the spine, or flexing the spine. Just through observation, we come to the point of seeing the interdependence of all of the different extremes, or all the different subtle, hardly extreme positionings that we make with the nervous system. And at that point of feeling opposites, we have the effect of stunning the mind, which we call nirodha. So I think the translating nirodha as suppressing the mind, or smushing the mind, flattening the mind, beating it down, being mean to your mind, are bad translations. But if you treat nirodha as simply the cessation or the stunning or the dropping, the leaving be, as is, of mind, I think that's a better translation for it. As if you were walking along out some open space trail, and the trees opened, and you actually caught a glimpse of the back range, unexpected, and you simply, for a moment, your breath stops, and you actually experience the whole pattern of presentation of the world. The whole world presents itself. No name or no commentary necessary at all. The mind loves to give commentary. I'm sure our own minds are all giving commentary on my commentary. And then there's sub-commentaries. Then at home we'll give more. But this commentary is important. Analysis is essential. Discrimination is survival. Yet it's nice to take a break every now and then. So our yoga is very simply described as a preliminary definition as nirodha in the Yoga Sutras. And then, of course, the mind always likes, it has that glimmer, but then again, we keep walking and the break in the trees isn't there anymore. And we're back to ordinary discursive thought. And then, so we need to provide commentary on the commentary to re-clarify the initial inspiration. So, all of us have inspiration, I assume. At least that's my assumption as a yoga teacher, that everyone has at least a little glimmer of this. Even most people who haven't done yoga, at some point in their life, they've at least had a free breath or been happy at least for a moment or two. And but oftentimes what I've done and what it appears everyone does is when we have an experience like that, the mind very quickly tries to take over and exploit it, maybe sell it, make a buck off of it, by reducing it to actually what the content of the mind was at the time of the experience. And so if it happened to be the Arapaho Glacier Basin that I caught through the gap in the trees as I stumbled off the open space trail, then I start an Arapaho Glacier Basin religion, saying, you should have seen what I saw. It was floating as if self-luminous in the ether. I completely left. I didn't even have a body. I needed to leave. And it was because it was sacred. And so the mind reduces the experience immediately to what the particular content was. And it was the letting go of the content that created the mystical experience. The mind getting everything backwards. And so we've all had these experiences, and we've all then somehow said, oh yeah, it was what I was smoking at the time, or it was that pill that they gave me, or it was the fact that it was really good chocolate, or it was the best wine I'd ever had. If only I could find that wine again. If only I could repeat the content, then I would repeat the experience. So we create a kind of addictive religious process based around a misinterpretation of our inspiration. And so the yogic process is designed to gradually feed our misunderstanding back around into the practice of the yoga, into the mechanism of the practice, to again reveal that silly mistake that the silly mind likes to do, of reducing it to a name and relational knowledge, creating a gap between what is and what ought to be or what was. And in that gap, a little tear in the fabric of mind, suffering for no reason at all over a silly thing. Thank you very much. Quit while you're ahead. Hebron. Yeah. Because the key was bothering me. Oh, the chant we chanted tonight? Hari Om. Did I? I changed the swara in the middle, but I didn't change the last.
Oh, it's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. Your memory, you're remembering it, comparing it to you. You sure? Did anyone record? Uh-oh.
I didn't. Just so you'd have something to talk about.
Right. Because the chanting was, I was so displeased by that chant. I was going, that was the yuckiest chant I've done in life. Because my mind, I couldn't remember the swara.
The question is the key more than the swara.
Oh.
No, it's the melody was different. Yeah, the melody was different. I thought that it was supposed to always be the same thing. It wasn't the ones where it was optional.
No, it was a Vedic chant. Probably what I did, I switched to past tense. No?
The way you taught was Tad-ma-ma-ba-do, and you went Tad-ma-ma-ba-do.
Oh.
You went the other way.
And I forgot. Probably I blew it. Yeah. No, well, that was the seed of my talk, actually. There was something imperfect going on. And yet, the process is, the mind recognizes that the chant is imperfect. This goes on in India all the time, because somebody will chant, and then the Brahmins sitting around in the back, they say, excuse me, sir. And they do it to each other. Yeah. Some Brahmins, they'll do it to each other, and then they'll correct each other, because the theory being that until it's chanted correctly, it won't do its thing. And then all the other castes are left out. They're all like sitting outside the building, looking in, saying, those Brahmins are much.
Did you say it was the same chant in South India and North India?
Same melody for the Vedic chants, Yeah.
But isn't
But
it this?
the emphasis. They gave me the swear, but I've heard it. The accent is so differently placed, and they each argue that the other is the wrong one.
Yeah. And so in South India, they poo-poo the North Indians. And in North India, they consider the South Indians to be, pain. Oh, they're too strict. And it's just like, there's the Orthodox, they're the ultra-Orthodox, and then there's the ultra-Orthodox, which are a pain in everybody's thing. And then there are the conservatives and liberals, reformed, and then the, who knows? And then there are other religions. But it's interesting around the practice, how it comes out. And so, like when I lead a chant, I find it much harder to lead it because I've got to wait for everybody else. And it's like the rhythm is like blah, blah, blah. And then I think, how do I resurrect this chant? And then sometimes I lose it. I can't push against the inertia. That's why it's best not to chant Vedic chants unless you've had coffee. Just before, yeah. Evening, best to chant non-Vedic chants. You can just switch into a melody. But the idea then being is there's the gap. There's the way the chant should be, the way the chant came out, which was slightly, and to the yogic ear, it's like, because the yogic mind immediately falls back and contextualizes the gap as a vibration or a natural occurrence within the greater mind. But the untrained mind can't fall back 2 frames and let it go. It's just, what a bad practice I had. And it happens all the time, particularly in asana practice. You get a stiff day because you ate something funny, or you didn't sleep well the night before because the wind was blowing, and you come in and your upward dog just never quite lit up, and never was quite wide. Downward dog just didn't hook in. You notice your mind, and in asana you do so much comparison. You got all these pictures. That's Iyengar doing it. That's so and so doing it. That's me doing it. That good summer, that I really practiced. And you're always comparing. And because there are techniques involved, the techniques have to be remembered in some form or another, it is absolutely inevitable that the mind runs in and impales itself on itself. And then we find ourselves, all hung up on our own yoga practice, which was this silly game in the first place. It's almost as if we're skewered and draped on the trident of our own mind, completely lost in yoga gossip, yoga technique, miserable. And then, somebody just walks in the door, has never done yoga, and you don't want to come in here.
It's too late.
Too late. We've already impaled. We've come impaled. Mind impaled on itself. Suffering. Suffering. It's occasionally, when you're in a fairly sattvic state, and someone comes in to tell you their story of misery, and it's almost like the advice is usually, it's okay. Just relax. That's okay. Those things happen. It happens to everybody. And the advice is always this kind of like, yeah, we're all dying. Yeah, I know 14 other people who had the flu. Get off of it. Stop feeling sorry for yourself. And it's like silly little twinges in the heart. So doesn't like me. It's like, and its universality is. Even though it's silly, even the yoga, they say even the wise get into it. In terms of abhinivesha, even the wise, when the time of death comes, go, wait a minute. Until then they have to drop back and fall back into the moment. There certainly are different approaches. Hatha yoga is an approach in which we use the impulses of the mind, and we kind of go with them in order to kind of dovetail them back so that we can observe them. And so, in a sense, Hatha yoga is like sitting practice with a lot of squirming, in which we squirm through the dog poses, downward dog, trying it almost as if we were allowing this sense that we're crawling out of our own skin. I'm going to get this channel open, this center path. Just get my shoulder, go around and line up. And so we have a natural desire in the mind, which tends to evolve towards this symmetry and this illumination of the central axis. And so we're thinking, okay, we're going with that as the pattern of practice. Now, whereas sitting practice, just sitting practice, my understanding, it isn't really different. It just, you're going to let it be. In other words, the urge to squirm arises, but it doesn't translate out and out and out. In other words, it's just you sit on the urge rather than squirming. And so we actually do both practices. Even if you don't like both practices, you end up doing both practices. Those who simply sit, and I was talking with Catherine about this before class, they squirm in between sitting sessions. So they'll go off for a week and sit, and then during the week off, they'll squirm like crazy. Or here comes the gong, they squirm. Sit. Because the mind tends to go back and forth through these modalities, one which we could call solar mind, one we could call lunar mind. And solar mind is in which the mind, without hesitation, but maybe with insight, will take a position. Okay, if it's a game, I'll choose. This piece will be me. There it is on the board. Let's play. Lunar mind is, I can't choose. Because it's a game, I can't choose which piece I want to be. And I can't choose where I'm going to start on the board. I just can't play these games anymore. Lunar mind, because it sees it's a game, it sees it's all. And so lunar mind tends to say, I'm just going to sit and let it be. Solar mind says, I'm going to practice. And solar mind is represented by the Pingala, the solar channel. Lunar mind is represented in Hatha Yoga by the lunar channel. So it's almost as if the mind switches back and forth between the kind of active and passive modes. Or a mode where it's like the sun comes up, a day mode. Well, there's only one star in the sky that matters. That's the sun. Who cares the fact that there are billions of them? They're so far away. Solar mode. And then lunar mode. Sun goes down, it's hidden. Oh, there's so many stars. There's so many points of view. And actually you need both modalities. You need the ability to take a stand, to see what the implications and the practical results of an action in the world are, of taking a stand. And then you need to see that even that was just a stand, and that there are other stands. And so the lunar mode makes a context, but the solar mode allows a single viewpoint. And we actually need both. You got to turn up the solar sometimes, or you you've got to bring in the lunar. And we find in Hatha Yoga, the theory is that this is reflected in the body, reflected in the breath, and reflected in how you've patterned your muscles habitually. And some of us are biased towards solar sun. Does that make sense? But the idea being that eventually they connect, at some point. And we don't want to reduce those two different approaches to practice to being the same, because we turned to the back of the book, cheated, oh, there's the answer. Oh, they're actually all Brahman, they're all the same. Because if you do that, it tends to lessen your inquiry. In other words, you think, oh, I can just kind of cheat and get out, the teacher won't glare at me anymore. Yes, I understand, it's all one. But in fact, you don't understand it. It's quite a slippery thing. So it's just an interesting mystery. And so we practice both approaches, actually. And it's fascinating that this lineage of practice, part of this lineage comes through Shankaracharya, who is the great, what century? 6th, 7th century non-dualist, who also is credited with being a master at yogic practices, or esoteric yoga practices, as well as the kind of the principal preacher of non-dualism, which is who's practicing, who's to meditate on what, of the such intense inquiry that the mind is stunned just by itself, without any particular practice, because the practices don't actually free you. Practices are something that you're already doing. You're practicing survival when you're choosing your pizza toppings. That's practice. We're lost in practices. Non-dualism is just the release of things as they are, releasing of practices. It doesn't really, even of meditation practice. To complete meditation, you give up meditation. You just let things be. It's just like the muddy pond. You take your hand out of the pond, and it settles on its own. So the muddy mind, you stop interfering, it becomes clear. So Shankaracharya also was considered the absolute master of tantric practice, which includes hatha yoga, or the practice of asana, and pranayama, and mudra, and bandha, and mantra, to awaken the central axis or the middle path. And interesting how the two practices seem to feed each other, too. And at one point, you can go back and forth. You say, well, I can't stand non-dualism anymore. It's just because what happens is the mind says, oh, I get that. I don't have to do anything. I'm not doing a thing because it's all one. But then, as in the Gita, Krishna said, well, Arjuna, sorry, you're going to do something even though you think you understand that you don't have to do anything. By your nature, you're already off and doing it. So by your own nature, you're impelled, you're making a mess. Because you'd only understood it intellectually. And so you have to, in a sense, go back to the accepting the nature of mind as being a dualist machine. And you engage in the game of games, which is the practice of yoga. In other words, we're seeing through the games, playing the game of games. And then, when lost in the game of games, taking it too seriously, like maybe by tomorrow, if I really keep this pranayama up, I figure by noon tomorrow, I'm going to blow open my central channel. Okay. And you think, I'm getting it. And you get, oh man, I'm so good at this practice. And then at that point, we have to fall back into non-dualism, which is just like, it's not even a thing. It's physiologically, it's the release of the palate. Like you got a joke. And the joke is your practice. Or at least your attitude towards it. Okay. The fact is, you could have a beautiful practice, but if you think that's you, what a farce, in terms of what yoga is actually about. So the mind is this silly thing. And my experience and my understanding is that we naturally oscillate, just like we oscillate between solar and lunar. We tend to oscillate across the spectrum of philosophy. Towards we have theistic tendencies that we then cycle around into almost atheistic tendencies, spiritual, back and forth, non-dualism, qualified non-dualism, qualified, semi-non-dualism, with the acceptance of the path or the possibility that it's really non-dual. And so this is the way that the nature of things is. It's like a snake that eats itself. However you identify it, whatever formula you create for it, it's not quite it. And that formula has little things that come around and eat it up for nutrition. So however, and the trouble with non-dualism is great, but the fact that you've made a school out of it means you're constructing theories about not theory making. And the very nature of the mental construction has these little hidden sparks. They contain all the opposing schools that tear it down. So it's the game of games. Not really. Because seeing it's a game is maybe a kind of a pathetic state. You see eternal pathos. It's just a game. Which could seem, from certain points of view, to be kind of it's a futile. That would be what the existentialist would see. It's just a game. Sisyphus rolling a rock up a hill, gets to the top, it rolls back down. And so but the fact that one would then, having the game insight, then reduce it to a theory or a kind of an existentialist or nihilistic theory is another game. And so the insight into game is the release of the nature of awareness as it is. So the nature of awareness as it is yoga. And that's the ecstatic joy. And you might make the comment, it's just a game. Or it's like you get a joke. A joke is often based on something that isn't really that funny. But it's almost where the mind gets, I have all of this emotional investment in these categories and words that some of them, when they occasionally overlap in a funny way, is like, it makes this quaking inside your body that we call laughter, which is just release of built-up energy. And so the yoga could be described as the endless pouring out of infinite radiance from this mysterious core deep in the central axis of the body, just like the sun releasing endless amounts of effulgence in the form of transmuted emotion and joy. To the point that there's no cognitive process involved at all. That would be the yoga. And the insight into the game theory would be an attendant thing. The joy. It's just like kids sometimes are overwhelmed with joy and they play games. Or puppies. All they want to do is play. But it's not due to the fact they've had this great insight into game theory. It's just the fact they've got this effulgence in their core. And the nature of the effulgence is to play games, but realizing they're games keeps it a game, keeps it happy, because part of the nice thing about a game is you can let it go, because it's a game, into freedom. And so the mind creates, constructs, dissolves religious processes and practices, but the joy is like the fact that it's free, it's open. There's nobody, no player in there. It's suffering, transmigrating. Does that make sense? I can't say it. It's just like. Anyway, thank you very much. Time for this game. So we'll go off on our biologically predetermined pursuit of food, other creaturely comforts, and hopefully we survive till we meet again. Some of us will.